When Mark and Olivia Carter purchased the grand estate in the Hollywood Hills, they had no idea what secrets lurked within its walls. The sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion, once owned by Leonardo DiCaprio, was a dream come true, a symbol of success and old Hollywood glamour. But from the moment they moved in, the dream began to crack. It started subtly, a distant rustling in the hallways late at night, like silk brushing against the walls. Olivia, an interior designer with a sharp eye for detail, dismissed it as the house settling. But Mark, a skeptic by nature, couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was moving through the corridors when no one else was awake. Then came the footsteps, not the soft creak of wood expanding with the weather, but the deliberate sound of leather soles pacing back and forth. One night, as Mark worked late in his office, he heard them right outside his door. He flung it open, expecting to catch Olivia playing a prank, but the hallway was empty except for the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. Neither he nor Olivia smoked. The first time Olivia saw a shadow move on its own, she was arranging books in the study, a room once rumored to be DiCaprio's private retreat. As she placed a heavy volume on the shelf, something shifted in the reflection of the glass cabinet doors. A tall, slender figure stood near the window, his silhouette unmistakably dressed in an old-fashioned suit. She spun around. Nothing. She laughed nervously, shaking off the chill that ran up her spine. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe. But then the whispers began. Late at night, as the couple lay in bed, hushed voices echoed down the corridors, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sometimes they heard laughter soft, musical, and feminine, like a starlet from a bygone era. Other times, the murmurs took on a darker edge, conversations in a language neither of them understood. One evening, a friend visiting for dinner turned pale as he excused himself from the table. He swore he had seen a woman in a shimmering silver gown standing at the foot of the staircase, watching them. No one else had seen her. Determined to find answers, Olivia dug into the history of the property. Before DiCaprio, the mansion had passed through the hands of various Hollywood elite, including a once-famous silent film actress who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Some believed she had never left, bound to the house that had been her final refuge from a world that had forgotten her. The final straw came on a stormy night. The power flickered, plunging the house into darkness. Mark grabbed a flashlight and made his way downstairs to check the breaker. As he stepped into the main hall, a cold gust of wind rushed past him, though the windows were shut tight. His breath hitched as he saw them figures, barely visible, drifting through the dim light. A man in a fedora, a woman in pearls, a dapper gentleman raising a glass in a silent toast. They stood in elegant poses as if frozen in time, their ghostly presence a reminder that Hollywood's golden age never truly faded, it simply lingered in the shadows. Mark and Olivia moved out a week later, breaking their lease without hesitation. They left behind a house that wasn't just haunted by history, but by those who refused to be forgotten. And to this day, when the nights are quiet and the wind is still, neighbors swear they can hear laughter echoing from the empty mansion, as if the ghosts of old Hollywood are still hosting their final, endless party. The house stood silent after the Carters fled, yet it never truly felt empty. The towering cypress trees lining the driveway seemed to shift in the windless nights, their dark forms pressing closer to the house like silent sentinels guarding a forgotten secret. The grand arched windows, which had once flooded the rooms with golden California sunlight, now loomed like watchful eyes, staring out over the city, unblinking, waiting. For weeks after their departure, the real estate agency struggled to find new tenants. A few curious visitors, lured by the prestige of its former owner, toured the estate but left with vague excuses, an inexplicable chill in the air, an unsettling feeling of being watched. Some claimed to hear the faintest strains of music, a slow, ghostly melody that flickered through the halls like the last breath of a vanished era. And then came the Turners. Vincent and Lillian Turner, a couple known for their love of Hollywood nostalgia, were enchanted by the mansion's history. Vincent, a film producer with a fascination for the golden age of cinema, saw it as a treasure, a tangible link to the past. Lillian, an artist, found beauty in the house's sweeping staircases, its intricate ceiling moldings, the whisper of stories trapped within its walls. The paperwork was signed in less than a week. The first night was uneventful, aside from the house's unsettling stillness. It was the kind of silence that seemed to listen. The Turners dismissed it as an effect of moving into an unfamiliar space, the weight of its history pressing on their senses. They explored the grand rooms by candlelight, sipping wine as they admired the craftsmanship of a bygone era. The vast dining hall, with its heavy velvet drapes, still carried the scent of aged wood and something more elusive in old perfume, floral and heady, like the lingering ghost of a ballroom long since emptied. Then, around midnight, Vincent paused. "Do you hear that?" Lillian looked up from unrolling a canvas, her fingers smudged with charcoal. A sound, faint yet distinct, drifted through the corridors. The measured click of footsteps on polished marble. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing just beyond the reach of their candle's glow. Vincent set his glass down and stepped into the hallway, his shadow stretching long across the floor. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, thick and expectant. Nothing. With a chuckle, he shook his head, brushing off the eerie sensation creeping up his spine. "This house is getting to me already," he muttered. Lillian exhaled, forcing a laugh, but her hands trembled as she turned back to her art. The second night, the whispers began. Soft at first, barely audible, like a forgotten radio transmission seeping through the walls. Lillian woke in the darkness, her breath shallow, the voice weaving through the air just beyond her reach. It wasn't Vincent. He lay beside her, his breathing deep, undisturbed. She strained to listen, catching fragments, words slipping in and out of recognition, laced with the crackle of static, as though spoken from another time. By the third night, she started seeing them. At first, it was only in reflections, the shimmer of movement in the vanity mirror, a shadow where there should have been none. But soon they crept closer, figures gliding through the edges of her vision, always just out of reach. A woman in an evening gown, her hair swept into soft curls, standing at the foot of their bed. A tall man with piercing eyes, watching from the end of the corridor before dissolving into the dark. Lillian began painting them, feverishly, obsessively. She would wake in the middle of the night, hands moving as if guided by something unseen, capturing their faces in broad, frantic strokes. The canvases filled their bedroom, spectral portraits of men and women from a lost era, their expressions frozen in something between longing and despair. One morning, Vincent found her standing in the study, staring at a freshly painted canvas with unblinking eyes. It was different from the others. This one had a face he recognized. The man in the portrait was real. He had seen him before, in grainy black and white photographs, in film reels buried deep in Hollywood's archives. A silent film star from the 1920s, a forgotten name on the Walk of Fame. He had died young, his career cut short by scandal. And yet, here he was, his dark eyes staring out from the canvas as if he had never truly left. A chill coiled in Vincent's gut. "Lillian, where did you see him?" She swallowed hard, her lips dry, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was standing in the doorway last night, watching us. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." Vincent could feel his pulse quicken as he stared at the painted face. The eyes, deep and knowing, seemed almost alive, their gaze following him as he shifted on his feet. It was impossible. The man Charles Dumont had died nearly a century ago. And yet, here he was, resurrected in strokes of oil and shadow, his sharp cheekbones and perfectly parted hair rendered in haunting detail. Lillian stood beside him, her breath shallow. "I didn't mean to paint him," she murmured. Her fingers trembled as they traced the dried ridges of the canvas. I woke up, and my hands moved on their own, like someone else was guiding them." Vincent tore his eyes from the portrait and turned to her. She looked pale, exhausted. Dark smudges lay beneath her eyes, and her hands, once steady, twitched at her sides. He could see the toll this house was taking on her. "Lil, maybe we should." The sound of something shattering cut through the air. Both of them whipped around. Came from downstairs. A heavy, splintering crash, like glass exploding against marble. Vincent grabbed the flashlight from the table, its weak beam flickering as he clicked it on. Lillian hesitated but followed as he stepped into the hallway. The house seemed darker than it should have been, the air thick, pressing against them like an unseen weight. They descended the grand staircase slowly, the wood groaning beneath their bare feet. The air smelled different down here, richer, heavier. The scent of aged paper, of old perfume, and something else, something metallic. Vincent swept the flashlight across the foyer. Nothing. The French doors leading to the garden stood firmly shut. The chandelier above them swayed gently, though there was no draft. And then he saw it. The massive mirror near the entrance, the one Olivia Carter had once admired for its gilded Art Deco frame, was shattered. Not cracked. Shattered. Its jagged remains lay strewn across the floor like ice shards, reflecting broken fragments of the room. Lillian's breath hitched. She clutched Vincent's arm, her fingers ice-cold. A movement, not in the room itself, but within the remaining slivers of the mirror still clinging to the frame. Vincent froze. Among the fractured reflections there were too many figures. The room was empty except for the two of them. Yet in the broken glass, shadowy shapes flickered and shifted. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant gowns, their faces indistinct, their forms blurred by time. And then, as Vincent watched, one of them moved differently. Deliberately, a woman in a beaded silver dress turned her head slowly, unnaturally, until her hollow eyes met his. She smiled. Vincent staggered back, nearly losing his footing. Lillian let out a small, choked gasp, her grip tightening on his arm. And then nothing. The figures vanished. The reflections returned to normal, just warped fragments of their own pale faces staring back at them. Vincent forced himself to breathe. "We need to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now?" Lillian didn't argue. They turned, moving quickly toward the front door. But just as Vincent reached for the handle, a whisper slithered through the air behind them. "Lo," amused. "Leaving so soon?" The door wouldn't budge. Vincent twisted the knob violently. It was locked. From the inside, a slow chill crawled up his spine as he felt something else in the room with them watching. Waiting. The chandelier's light flickered. The air thickened, pressing against them like invisible hands. The scent of cigarette smoke curled through the air. And from deep within the house, past the darkened corridors and rooms filled with ghosts of forgotten Hollywood, came the sound of footsteps. Coming closer. The footsteps echoed through the cavernous halls, measured, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever approached did not need to hurry. The air thickened, humming with something unseen, something that pressed against Vincent's skin, making the hairs on his arms rise. Lillian stood frozen beside him, her fingers still curled around his wrist like a lifeline. Vincent yanked at the door handle again. It rattled uselessly, locked by an unseen force. His breath came fast now, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The footsteps grew closer, then silence. The house held its breath. Vincent turned, the flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the grand foyer, over the shattered mirror, up the staircase. The space was empty, and yet the presence lingered, unseen but undeniably there. Then, a whisper, low, right by his ear. "Don't you recognize us?" Vincent spun, his back slamming into the heavy wooden door. The flashlight flickered. A shadow passed over the walls. No, not one. Many, moving like ripples in water, shifting, growing, taking form. Lillian let out a small, sharp breath, her grip tightening on his arm. They weren't alone. Figures emerged from the darkness. Faint at first like smudges of mist, then sharpening into something more solid. They stood in the archways, in the dim alcoves, along the balcony above. Men in tailored suits, their faces shadowed by fedoras. Women in gowns that shimmered in the dim light, their lips painted dark, their eyes hollow. Some smiled. Others watched with something colder, something calculating. Vincent's breath came short. He knew them. Not personally, no, but he had seen them before. In old photographs, in film reels from an era long past. Silent stars. Forgotten faces. Names that had once graced marquees but had faded into dust. And yet, here they were, impossibly present. Lillian let out a shuddering exhale. Vincent, her voice was barely above a whisper. They're waiting for something, then movement. One of the figures stepped forward, breaking from the crowd of ghosts. A man, tall and thin, his tuxedo perfectly pressed, his shoes gleaming even in the dim light. His features were sharp, aristocratic, his hair slicked back with a precision that seemed too perfect, too unnatural. Vincent recognized him instantly. Charles Dumont. The same face Lillian had painted without ever having seen it before. The ghost of the silent film star smiled, slow and knowing. "You stayed," he said. His voice rich with something both amused and dark. His tone held the weight of years, of time unspooling like an old film reel, crackling and looping back on itself. Vincent swallowed, his throat dry. He could feel Lillian trembling beside him, but neither of them could move. Dumont tilted his head slightly, studying them. Behind him, the other ghosts remained still, watching, waiting. The air pulsed with an invisible energy, the house itself holding its breath. Then, a flicker. The chandelier above them dimmed for just a second, and in that instant, Dumont was suddenly closer. Only a few feet away now, his presence overwhelming. The scent of old cologne clung to the air, mingled with something older dust, celluloid, the ghost of something long burned away. His dark eyes flicked to Lillian. "You've seen us, haven't you?" His smile widened. "Felt us?" Lillian's breath hitched. "You've been painting us." Vincent stepped forward, shielding her instinctively. "We're leaving," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Dumont chuckled. It was a terrible sound. Low, smooth, touched with something ancient, something that had been waiting far too long. "Oh, Vincent," Dumont murmured, eyes gleaming. "You don't leave history behind. You become part of it." The words slithered over Vincent's skin like a promise, like a curse. Then, the room changed. The grand chandelier flared to life, flooding the space with a golden glow, not the cold electric light of the present, but something softer, flickering, as if powered by candlelight. The walls shimmered, shifting, morphing. The peeling wallpaper restored itself, the cracked marble floors polished smooth once more. The house breathed, rewound, pulling itself back to its golden years. Music filled the air. Slow, sultry jazz, distant but growing stronger. And then there were more people. Not ghosts. Not anymore. Elegant couples laughed and danced beneath the chandelier, their laughter rich and full. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried silver trays of champagne, weaving through the guests with effortless grace. The mansion was no longer a relic of the past, it was the past. And Vincent and Lillian were no longer just witnesses. They were inside it. Lillian let out a choked gasp, spinning wildly. "Vincent, what's happening?" He grabbed her hand, his own ice cold. His heart pounded wildly. The ghosts know, the people moved around them, untouched by their presence. It was as if they had stepped through a tear in time, dragged into an era that refused to be forgotten. Dumont smiled, raising a glass in a silent toast. "Welcome to the party," he said. The music swelled. The past had taken them, and it wasn't letting go. Vincent's grip tightened around Lillian's hand as the past closed around them like a velvet curtain. The laughter, the music, the glimmer of chandeliers, it all felt too real, too alive. The mansion had rewound itself, trapping them in a golden age that had long since faded. Lillian spun in place, eyes wide with terror. "We have to get out." But the walls had changed. The grand entrance was no longer a door leading to the present but an arched passageway, leading deeper into the illusion. Everywhere they turned, more guests filled the space, elegant, lively, untouched by time. Yet their eyes were wrong. Too bright, too empty. Vincent turned back to Dumont, who stood effortlessly poised, sipping his champagne with that same knowing smile. "This isn't real," Vincent said, his voice hoarse. "None of this is real." Dumont let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, but it is," he gestured to the revelers. They thought the same once, until they accepted it, until they understood. Lillian's breath hitched. Understood what? Dumont's smile faded. No one leaves. The music faltered. The faces around them shifted, laughter turning hollow, smiles stretching too wide, eyes darkening into pits of shadow. The illusion cracked, just for a moment, revealing the truth beneath. The walls were rotting. The chandelier was dust. The guests were not guests. They were trapped souls. And the Turners were next. Vincent acted without thinking. He grabbed Lillian and ran, shoving through the crowd, through the mirage of glitz and glamour, past hands that tried to hold them back. The golden glow dimmed, the house fighting to keep them. The front doors appeared again, warped but real. Vincent lunged for the handle, cold metal, solid beneath his fingers. He twisted, pushed, prayed. The doors burst open. Cold night air rushed in, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth inside. Lillian gasped, stumbling forward. Vincent followed, heart hammering. The second they crossed the threshold, silence fell. They turned. The house was dark again. Empty, dust-covered. The grand party, the ghosts, the music all gone. But just before Vincent could breathe, before relief could settle in, a faint sound drifted from inside. Laughter. Slow. Faint. And then Dumont's voice, whispering through the shadows. "See you soon." The doors slammed shut, and the house once again waited. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.